Ethan Cole lived on a wide stretch of land in West Texas. His ranch sat between two dry hills, and the air always carried dust that never seemed to settle. The place looked peaceful from a distance: old wooden fences, a weathered barn, and cattle grazing quietly in the fading sunlight. But locals in the nearby town whispered that the Cole ranch was cursed. They said every man who tried to work there left within days. Some spoke of strange sounds at night, others of sudden storms that came only over Ethan's land. Ethan never paid much attention to rumors. He believed curses were just stories people told when they couldn't explain pain. But deep inside, Ethan knew there was truth in those whispers. Not a ghost or spirit kind of truth, but a truth that came from guilt. Years ago, on a night that still visited him in his sleep, his younger brother Luke had died during a cattle drive. The storm had been wild and sudden. The lightning flashed so close that it blinded their horses. Ethan had pushed Luke to move faster, to drive the herd through the storm before they scattered. But Luke's horse slipped on the wet ground and fell into the ravine. Ethan never saw him alive again. After that night, something inside Ethan broke. He stayed on the ranch, but he didn't live, and he just existed. His laughter, once loud and full of mischief, disappeared. His friends stopped visiting because he no longer spoke more than a few words at a time. The local pastor once told him that forgiveness was part of healing, but Ethan couldn't forgive himself. Every sound of thunder reminded him of Luke's last scream. Every gust of wind across the plains carried that memory back to him. Years passed, and Ethan's world grew smaller. He woke up before sunrise, fed his horses, checked the fences, and came home before dark. He ate the same meal every night and sat on the porch staring into the desert until the stars filled the sky. He didn't pray anymore. He didn't talk to anyone. His only companion was his horse, a loyal brown mare named Daisy. Even she seemed to understand the sadness in his eyes. One summer evening, the sky turned orange, and the wind started to rise. Ethan was repairing a section of the old fence when he noticed the sky shifting colors, gray rolling clouds swallowing the light. A storm was coming again, quick and angry. He hurried to pack up his tools, but before he could reach the barn, lightning struck near the old well behind the house. The ground trembled, and for a second the air filled with a faint echo, like a whisper carried through the wind. He stopped. It was so soft he thought it was just the storm's sound. But then it came again, faint, trembling, and almost like someone speaking. "Go deeper. Make it quick inside." The voice was neither man nor woman. It carried both sadness and urgency. Ethan froze, his heartbeat pounding in his chest. The voice had come from the well, the same well that had been dry for years. He dropped his tools and stepped closer. The rain had started now, cold and thin. Lightning flashed again, lighting the rim of the old stone well. The wood cover that once sealed it was cracked and half broken. Ethan's boots sank in the wet dirt as he leaned over the edge, staring into the darkness below. There was nothing, just blackness and the faint echo of water dripping somewhere deep inside. He whispered, "Who's there?" Only the wind answered. For a few seconds he stood still, unable to move. The voice had felt so real that his chest tightened with something he hadn't felt in years: fear. Not of death, but of memory. Slowly he stepped back and pulled the broken lid over the well again. He didn't tell himself it was nothing. Deep down he knew that voice wasn't a dream. That night the storm grew worse. The wind howled against the windows and rain slammed on the roof like nails. Ethan sat by the fireplace, boots still wet, staring at the flames. Daisy paced restlessly in the stable, neighing at every sound of thunder. The storm reminded him of the night Luke had died, and once again, guilt wrapped around him like cold chains. When the lightning struck again outside, the room filled with light, and in that flash, for just a heartbeat, Ethan saw a shadow by the door. He stood quickly, his breath sharp. "Who's there?" he shouted, his voice rough. The door creaked open slightly from the wind, but no one answered. Still, he felt it again, the same whisper, only softer now. "Go deeper." He rubbed his temples, telling himself it was just his mind playing tricks, but the whisper wouldn't leave. It repeated in his thoughts as he tried to sleep, like a gentle echo from the past. He didn't dream that night, and he just lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if Luke's spirit was trying to tell him something. Morning came slow and gray. The storm had passed, but the air felt heavy. The fields were wet and shining under the weak sunlight. Ethan walked out to check the fences again, but his steps kept leading him back to the old well. The dirt around it was darker than before, soaked from rain. Something inside him pushed to take another look, though every part of him wanted to turn away. He knelt beside it and touched the cold stone edge. The whisper hadn't returned, but the silence felt thick, like the air was waiting for him to speak first. He stayed there for a long time, hat in hand, eyes fixed on the shadows below. "Luke," he finally said softly, "if you're still out there, I'm sorry." His voice cracked on the last word. He hadn't said his brother's name out loud in years. Just as he was about to stand, he heard the sound of hooves. He turned to see a rider approaching. A woman on a gray horse, her coat dark with dust from the road. She slowed when she reached the gate and called out, "You Ethan Cole?" He nodded, still confused. "Who's asking?" She dismounted and smiled gently. "Name's Clara Whitmore. I'm a historian. I study old places like this, the ones people say are cursed." Ethan looked at her in silence. He wasn't sure if she was joking, but her eyes were calm and honest. She seemed out of place here. Clean white shirt, notebook in hand, and a curious look that most people lost after living in the desert too long. "You're wasting your time," he muttered, turning away. "Ain't nothing here but dust and bad memories." But Clara didn't leave. She looked around, her gaze landing on the old well. "You've heard it, haven't you?" she asked quietly. Ethan stopped walking. His hands froze at his sides. "Heard what?" "The whisper," she said. Her voice was steady. "This land remembers pain. Sometimes it speaks when someone's heart is ready to listen." Ethan turned back, eyes wide. "Who told you that?" "No one," she replied softly. "I just feel it." He stared at her for a long time, then finally sighed. "If you can explain what's happening here, you're welcome to stay. But don't expect me to believe in ghosts." Clara smiled slightly. "I'm not asking you to believe in ghosts, Mr. Cole. I'm asking you to believe in unfinished stories." That night, as the sun disappeared behind the hills, the ranch grew quiet again. Ethan sat on his porch while Clara studied old maps under the lamplight. The air was still. Even the crickets were silent. But somewhere beyond the barn, the wind carried a faint whisper again. It brushed past the well, crossed the empty field, and reached Ethan's ear. "Go deeper. Make it quick inside." He looked toward the sound, his heart pounding. Clara raised her head and met his eyes. She'd heard it too, and that was the moment Ethan realized the story of his past wasn't over. The morning sun rose slowly over the dusty hills. Ethan stood by the porch, coffee in hand, watching the light spread across the land. Clara Whitmore had stayed the night in the small guest cabin near the barn. She had said she wanted to study the land at dawn, when the air was quiet and the world still remembered its dreams. Ethan didn't understand her words, but there was something about her calmness that made him feel a little less heavy inside. When she came out, her notebook was already in her hand, and her hair blew softly in the wind. "You didn't sleep much, did you?" she asked. Ethan gave a small smile, the first in a long time. "Not really." The whisper came again, he said quietly. Clara looked up at the sky. "I thought so," she replied. "Sometimes the past speaks louder when we finally stop running from it." They walked to the old well together. The morning light made it look less frightening, though the stones were still damp from last night's rain. Clara knelt near the edge, studying the carvings on the stones. "This well is older than your house," she said. "Maybe 100 years older." Ethan looked down, his jaw tightening. "My father said it was built by settlers before us. He told me never to use it. Said it ran dry when the old owners disappeared." Clara ran her fingers along the stone and said softly, "Maybe they didn't disappear. Maybe something kept them here." Ethan didn't like how that sounded. "I told you there's no curse. Only bad memories," he said, trying to hide the unease in his voice. Clara smiled gently. "Bad memories can curse a person more than ghosts ever could." They stood there in silence for a while. A hawk circled overhead, and the wind carried the faint sound of cattle in the distance. Ethan finally broke the silence. "You said yesterday this land remembers pain."
"What did you mean?"
Clara turned to him. "When a place witnesses deep sorrow, when someone dies in guilt or love turns into regret and it leaves an echo. Not a ghost, not a spirit, but something in the air. Most people never notice it. But those who carry the same kind of pain, they hear it." Ethan looked at her carefully. "So you think I'm hearing echoes?" "I think," Clara said, looking into his eyes, "that you're hearing your own heart, and the part of your brother that never left you." Ethan looked away. The mention of Luke's name still hurt, like pressing a wound that had never healed. "He died because I pushed him too hard," he whispered. "If I had stopped that night, if I had waited just one more hour." His voice trailed off and his hands clenched. Clara didn't interrupt. She let the silence carry the truth. Then she said softly, "What if he forgave you long ago, but you never forgave yourself?" Ethan didn't answer. He walked toward the barn, trying to keep his emotions buried, but Clara followed. Inside, the air smelled of hay and wood. The light from the cracks in the walls cut across the floor like thin golden lines. Clara looked around. "You've kept everything the same, haven't you?" He nodded. "Luke helped me build this barn. I couldn't change it." She touched one of the beams gently, as if feeling the memory in the wood. "You've been keeping the past alive by not letting it move on," she said. "Maybe that's why the whisper keeps coming." Ethan leaned against a post, staring at the floor. "You sound like a preacher," he said, though his tone wasn't unkind. Clara smiled faintly. "Maybe I'm just someone who believes the past wants to be understood, not feared." That night, Clara stayed for supper. They ate in silence at first, until she began asking questions. Small things about Luke, about how they grew up, about the ranch before the storm. Ethan spoke slowly at first, but as the night went on, the memories flowed more easily. He told her how Luke used to ride barefoot because he hated boots, how he'd sneak extra biscuits from the kitchen, how he'd whistle songs he didn't even know the words to. Clara listened with a soft smile. "You talk about him like he's still here," she said. Ethan sighed. "Sometimes it feels like he is." The wind outside grew louder. The air inside the room shifted. Clara's eyes widened slightly. She heard it too. A soft voice like a whisper carried through the walls. "Go deeper. Make it quick inside." The lantern flickered. Ethan froze, his hands gripping the table. Clara stood slowly and turned toward the window. "It's the same voice," she said quietly. Ethan swallowed hard. "I heard it again last night," he said. "I thought maybe I was losing my mind." Clara shook her head. "You're not. The voice isn't here to scare you. It's trying to guide you." Ethan looked at her sharply. "Guide me where? To dig up bones?" "No," Clara said. "To dig up truth." She walked toward the well again, lantern in hand. Ethan followed, unsure why he couldn't just walk away. The air outside was cooler now, and the moon cast pale light over the land. When they reached the well, Clara lowered the lantern slowly, letting its glow fall into the darkness. The light flickered against the stone walls but didn't reach the bottom. "It's deeper than it looks," she said. "Maybe something's down there." Ethan frowned. "It's been dry for years. I checked it myself when I was younger." "Check again," Clara said softly. "This time listen not with your ears, but with your heart." Her words made him uncomfortable, yet they stuck. Ethan stood there, staring into the shadows, feeling something stir inside him. Not fear, but a strange pull, like the earth itself wanted him to remember something. The whisper came again, faint but clear. "Go deeper." He stepped back, breathing heavily. "Clara, I can't do this," he said, his voice shaking. "I've spent years trying to forget that night. I can't dig it up again." Clara looked at him, her eyes calm but firm. "Ethan, you're not digging up pain, you're freeing it." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The wind brushed through the dry grass, and somewhere far off an owl called. Finally, Ethan nodded. "Tomorrow," he said, "at first light. We'll see what's down there." Clara smiled softly. "Good. The truth doesn't like to stay buried forever." That night, sleep didn't come easily to either of them. Ethan sat by the fire again, the letter from Luke's last day still fresh in his memory. He thought about how Luke had always believed in him. How he'd once said, "You're the strong one. Ethan, you'll keep this place alive." But the truth was, Ethan hadn't kept anything alive. Not his brother, not his spirit, not his hope. Outside, the wind whispered through the mesquite trees, gentle and haunting. Ethan closed his eyes, and for the first time, he didn't try to block the sound out. He let it flow through him, letting the pain speak instead of burying it. As dawn began to rise, the sky turned a soft pink over the plains. Ethan stepped outside, rope and lantern in hand. Clara was already waiting near the well, her notebook tucked away this time. She smiled faintly. "Ready?" she asked. Ethan looked down into the darkness once more. The whisper didn't come, but the silence was full of meaning. "I don't know what I'll find," he said quietly, "but I know I can't keep living like I don't hear it." Clara nodded. "Then let's go deeper." And for the first time in years, Ethan Cole felt something inside him shift. Not fear, not sorrow, but courage. A small spark of it, faint but real. He tied the rope around a sturdy beam, tested its strength, and began lowering himself into the well that had haunted him for so long. The light of the lantern followed him down, fading as the distance grew. The cold air rose from below, carrying the scent of earth and time. Clara watched from above, holding her breath, and then somewhere near the bottom, Ethan's boots struck something solid. He looked down. It wasn't stone, it was wood. The sound that echoed in the well made Ethan freeze. His boots had hit something that wasn't stone. It was wood, old and rough beneath his fingers. The air down there was damp and heavy, and he could smell earth and time, like the scent of an old memory that had waited too long to be remembered. He lifted the lantern carefully, letting its light fall over the surface. The wood was shaped like a small box covered in layers of mud and dust. His heart began to pound. "Clara," he called up. His voice echoed up the narrow shaft. "There's something down here." Clara's voice floated back from above, steady but curious. "What is it?" "I think it's a box," Ethan said. "Looks old. Maybe buried on purpose." The rope creaked as he leaned down, brushing dirt away. The box was heavy, sealed with something that looked like wax. For a moment he hesitated. His hands trembled slightly. "Luke," he whispered under his breath. He didn't know why he said his brother's name, but it felt right, like the box somehow belonged to that part of his life. He tied the box carefully to the rope, tugging it twice to signal Clara. "Pull it up slow," he shouted. She nodded and began to lift it, her arms straining. The old rope groaned, but it held. Once the box reached the top, Ethan climbed up after it, his clothes covered in dirt and his face streaked with sweat. When he finally stood beside Clara again, the morning sun was already climbing higher. Both of them stared at the box in silence. It was small enough to fit between them, but something about it felt larger, as if it carried a weight beyond its size. Clara knelt down, wiping the mud off the top. "There's an engraving here," she said softly. Ethan crouched beside her and squinted at the faded letters. They were barely visible, carved in shaky handwriting. "To the one who forgives." Ethan felt his chest tighten. "What does that mean?" he murmured. Clara looked at him gently. "Maybe it means it was left for someone who would find peace here, someone who needed to forgive or be forgiven." They carried the box to the porch and placed it on the wooden table. The seal was thick, but after a few strikes with a chisel, it cracked open. Inside were a few items, each one carefully wrapped in old cloth. Ethan unwrapped the first piece. It was a small pocket knife, the kind his brother Luke used to carry everywhere. The second item was a compass, its glass cracked but the needle still moving faintly. And the third was a folded letter, yellow with age and stained with water. Ethan's breath caught. His fingers shook as he unfolded the letter. The writing was faded, but it was clear enough to read. "If I don't make it, tell Ethan I forgive him. The storm wasn't his fault." For a long moment, the world around him went still. The wind stopped, the birds went silent, and even the creaking of the porch boards faded away. Ethan just stared at the letter, unable to breathe. His throat tightened, and before he could stop himself, tears filled his eyes. Clara placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Ethan," she said softly, "your brother must have written this before he—" "I know," Ethan interrupted, his voice breaking. "He must have written it that night. When the storm hit." He sat down slowly, the letter trembling in his hands. "I searched for him for hours after the storm. When I found his horse, I thought he was gone. I thought I'd never hear from him again." Clara knelt beside him. "Maybe you were meant to find this now. Maybe this is how he's telling you to let go." Ethan nodded slowly, tears rolling down his cheeks. "I've carried that night for so long," he said. "Every sunrise, every sound of thunder, it all came back. I thought the whisper was punishing me." Clara shook her head. It wasn't a punishment. It was a reminder, a call to finish what was left undone. He stared at the words again, the ink faded but powerful. "Tell Ethan I forgive him." He whispered them out loud, his voice trembling. "Luke forgave me." The weight on his chest seemed to lighten, though it didn't disappear completely. He could feel something shifting. Not outside him, but inside. Like a lock that had finally turned after years of silence. He looked at Clara, his voice rough but sincere. "You were right. This land wasn't cursed. I was. Clara smiled faintly, her eyes soft. And now? Ethan looked out toward the hills where the light touched the golden grass. Now I think it's free, he said. They sat there for a long time, saying nothing. The wind moved gently through the fields, but it no longer carried sorrow. Instead, it sounded almost peaceful, like a sigh after a long, hard cry. Later that afternoon, Ethan walked down to the small patch of land where he and Luke used to race horses. The earth was warm beneath his boots, and he could almost hear Luke's laughter echoing in the distance. He dug a small hole near the edge of the field and placed the box inside, closing it gently. "You can rest now, little brother," he whispered. "And maybe I can too." When he covered the hole and stood up, he felt lighter. The air around him seemed brighter, the colors sharper. For years his world had been gray, but now it held color again. As evening fell, Clara joined him on the porch. She looked at him quietly for a moment before saying, "You know, most people don't get the chance to make peace with their past." "You did." Ethan looked down at his hands. "It doesn't change what happened," he said softly. "But maybe it changes what happens next." She smiled. "That's what forgiveness does. It doesn't erase pain, but it gives it meaning." Ethan nodded, and for the first time in years he felt something close to peace. The wind carried a soft sound again, but it wasn't the whisper from before. It was different now, lighter, almost like a thank you carried through the night air. He closed his eyes and listened. "Did you hear that?" he asked. Clara smiled. "Yes, but this time it's not asking. It's saying goodbye." Ethan looked out over the land, his heart steady. "Then I reckon it's time I stopped running from ghosts and started living again," he said. That night he didn't sit alone by the fire. He and Clara talked about the future, how he might rebuild the ranch, maybe open it again, maybe even teach others the way Luke once taught him. It wasn't easy for Ethan to imagine joy, but for the first time it didn't feel impossible. Before going to bed, he stepped outside one last time. The stars were bright, the sky endless. He looked toward the well, now silent and calm. "Thank you, Luke," he whispered, "for forgiving me." And as he turned back toward the house, the faintest sound drifted through the air, not from the well, but from the wind itself. A soft whisper, peaceful and gentle. "Go deeper, into life." Ethan smiled, a tear slipping down his cheek. The whisper was gone, but its meaning stayed. Not to dig into sorrow, but into understanding, forgiveness, and life itself. That night he slept deeply, without dreams. The storm had finally passed. The morning after Ethan buried the box, the air around the ranch felt different. The usual heaviness was gone. The sky was clear, painted in soft blue with streaks of pink. The birds, which had stayed away for months, returned to the trees near the barn. Daisy, his horse, stood calm by the fence, as if she too could sense the peace settling over the land. For the first time in years, Ethan felt no ache in his chest when he woke. The guilt that used to weigh him down every morning had loosened its hold. Clara came out of the cabin holding 2 cups of coffee. "You look better today," she said with a small smile. Ethan nodded, taking a sip. "Feels like the land's breathing again," he replied. She glanced at the fields and smiled softly. "It's because you're breathing again," she said. "You finally let yourself heal." He looked at her for a moment and said quietly, "Last night was the first time I slept without hearing the storm." "That's what forgiveness does," Clara said. "It doesn't erase the memory. It just takes away its power." Ethan walked toward the fence, watching the cattle move slowly across the pasture. He ran his hand along the wood, thinking about Luke. He could still see his brother's face sometimes, that wide grin, those bright eyes filled with mischief. But now, instead of pain, the memory brought warmth. All day, Ethan worked around the ranch, mending, cleaning, repairing old things that had been broken for too long. Clara helped where she could, and sometimes they didn't speak at all. The silence between them was peaceful now, not heavy. When the sun began to sink, they sat on the porch together, watching the light fade across the hills. "You ever wonder," Ethan said quietly, "why things happen the way they do? Why we lose people who mean the world to us?" Clara nodded. "I do. But I think sometimes loss isn't meant to destroy us. It's meant to change us." He thought about that. The wind moved gently through the tall grass, and the sound of crickets filled the evening air. Everything around them seemed alive again. Ethan smiled faintly. "Luke used to say something like that," he said. "Said the hardest storms bring the greenest fields." "That sounds like him," Clara said, smiling. As night settled, Ethan stood and walked toward the well. It had become quiet now, just another part of the land. He stared down into the darkness, not with fear but gratitude. The whisper hadn't returned since he found the letter, but sometimes he could still feel it, not as a sound, but as a warmth deep inside his chest. He whispered softly, "Thank you, brother." Just then, a soft breeze brushed across his face. It carried the scent of rain even though the sky was clear. And then faintly, so faintly he thought he imagined it, a voice moved with the wind. "Thank you." Ethan froze. He looked around, his eyes wide, but no one was there. The air was still again, peaceful and gentle. He smiled through a tear that rolled down his cheek. The voice wasn't haunting him anymore. It wasn't asking. It was saying goodbye. When he walked back to the porch, Clara was watching him. She had seen the change in his face. "You heard it again, didn't you?" she asked quietly. He nodded slowly. "Yeah," he said. But it wasn't the same this time. It didn't feel heavy, it felt right. Clara's voice softened. "It's over now, Ethan. The curse is broken." Ethan looked out at the horizon where the last bit of sunlight painted the hills. "I guess it was never a curse," he said. "Just a heart that couldn't forgive itself." That night they shared a quiet supper. Clara read through some of her notes about the ranch's history, and Ethan listened as she spoke about the people who once lived on the land, settlers who had faced droughts, storms, and loss. It struck him how pain and strength always walked side by side in life. After dinner, Ethan stepped outside again. The stars were bright and sharp and the air was cool. He walked slowly through the field, the grass brushing against his boots. Every step felt lighter. He could almost feel Luke walking beside him, not as a ghost but as a memory alive in every sound of the night. He stopped near the spot where he had buried the box. The moonlight touched the earth there, and a small wildflower had already started to grow. He knelt down, running his fingers gently over the soil. "You can rest easy now," he said softly. "I'll take care of this place for both of us." When he stood again, he felt something deep inside, a quiet strength like the kind he used to have before everything fell apart. It wasn't pride or power, it was peace. Over the next few days, the change in Ethan became clear. The ranch hands who had left before started to visit again. The cattle stayed calm, the crops began to grow better, and the water in the wells turned clearer. The locals in town noticed the difference too. They stopped whispering about curses and started talking about miracles. One afternoon, while repairing the barn roof, Ethan saw Clara sitting under a tree writing in her notebook. He climbed down and walked over. "You writing about me?" he asked with a grin. She laughed. "Maybe," she said, "but mostly about this land, and how healing isn't about forgetting pain. It's about finding meaning in it." Ethan nodded. "Then write this," he said. "The land isn't cursed anymore. It's alive." Clara smiled. "That's a good line," she said, jotting it down. That evening, as the sun set, they sat together watching the sky turn gold and purple. Ethan spoke softly. "You know, Clara, I used to think I'd spend the rest of my life alone, that this place would be my prison. But now it feels like home again." Clara turned to him and said, "It always was. You just had to see it with new eyes." He nodded, the light from the fire flickering in his eyes. Maybe that's what redemption really is, not changing the past, but changing how you live with it. As the night deepened, Ethan dozed off on the porch. He dreamed. But the dream wasn't like the old ones filled with thunder and fear. He saw Luke standing near the fence, smiling. The sky behind him was clear, no storm in sight. Luke lifted a hand, waved once, and turned toward the horizon. Then the dream faded into light. When Ethan woke the next morning, Clara was already preparing to leave. Her horse was saddled, her notebook packed. "You're heading out?" he asked, trying to hide his sadness. She nodded. "I've learned what I came here to learn, and you've found what you needed to find." He looked down, nodding slowly. "I'm not good at goodbyes," he admitted. Clara smiled kindly. "Then don't say it. Just promise me one thing, keep this place alive. Keep your brother's memory alive, not through guilt, but through love." Ethan stepped closer, tipping his hat slightly. "I will," he said. "You helped me see what I couldn't for years." "Thank you," she smiled warmly. "Don't thank me. Thank the one who whispered to you." Ethan chuckled softly. "Yeah," he said, glancing toward the well. "I reckon I already did." Clara mounted her horse and turned toward the open road. The morning light bathed the ranch in gold, and the wind carried a peaceful hum through the grass. Ethan watched her ride away until she disappeared over the hill. Then he looked up at the sky and whispered, "Go deeper. Make it quick inside." He understood now. It had never meant to dig into the ground, but into his own heart, to face the pain, to forgive, to live again. The whisper no longer haunted him. It had become a part of him, a voice of love, not loss. And as the wind moved gently across the plains, Ethan Cole, the cowboy who once lived under a curse, stood tall under the rising sun, finally free, finally whole. The months that followed Clara's departure were quiet, but not lonely. Ethan Cole woke up each morning before sunrise just as he always had, but now the mornings felt alive. The air was softer, the sky brighter, and the silence no longer carried guilt. It carried peace. He'd often stand by the porch with a cup of coffee, watching the golden light spill over the hills, and he'd whisper softly, "Morning, Luke." It became his way of keeping his brother close, not through pain anymore, but through gratitude. Word spread through the nearby town that the Cole Ranch was alive again. The cattle were healthy, the grass green, and the wells full. Some people called it luck. Others said it was faith. Ethan just smiled when he heard those things. He knew it wasn't luck or magic. It was forgiveness. By the end of spring, Ethan decided to open the ranch again. Not as a business, but as a place for others who had lost something in life. People who carried heavy hearts just like he once had. He named it Redemption Ranch, a name that made folks in town stop and nod with quiet respect. He put up a hand-painted sign by the road. A place to heal, a place to hope. The first to arrive were a group of orphans from the nearby county home. They were quiet kids, unsure of him at first. But Ethan knew what silence felt like. He'd lived in it long enough to understand it wasn't emptiness, just hurt waiting for warmth. So he taught them how to ride, how to feed the horses, and how to mend fences. The youngest one, a boy named Tommy, reminded him so much of Luke it almost broke his heart the first day. But when Tommy smiled, it healed him instead. "Mr. Cole," Tommy said one morning, "is it true this place used to be cursed?" Ethan chuckled, kneeling beside the boy. "It was," he said, "but not the land, it was me. I carried the curse right here." He tapped his chest gently. "Now it's gone." The boy looked curious. "How did you break it?" Ethan smiled softly. "By listening to what I was afraid to hear, and forgiving myself for what I couldn't change." The boy nodded slowly, not fully understanding but feeling the truth in Ethan's voice. Over time, the ranch filled with laughter again. The sound of kids running, horses neighing, and the clatter of tools echoed through the valley. The same place that once carried sorrow was now alive with hope. One afternoon, while repairing the corral, Ethan looked up and saw a group of neighbors arriving, people who once avoided the ranch. They came offering help, tools, and even animals. "Heard you're helping the young ones," one of them said. "Could use a man like you at the fair this summer. Folks say you've got something special going here." Ethan laughed softly. "Just trying to build something worth remembering." The man nodded. "You already have." Days turned into weeks, and each day the ranch became more beautiful. Ethan fixed the barn roof, painted the fences white, and planted flowers near the old well. He didn't seal it or hide it. Instead, he built a small wooden frame around it with a simple sign, "For those who need to let go." People from town started coming by, not to talk about curses, but to leave their own burdens behind. Some would drop small notes inside the well. Others would simply stand in silence for a moment and walk away lighter. Ethan never asked what they wrote. He didn't need to. He knew that everyone carried a voice they were afraid to face, just like he once did. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted everything in gold, Ethan sat on the porch with Daisy beside him. The air smelled of fresh hay and rain. He took off his hat and rested it on his knee, staring at the horizon. He could hear laughter in the distance, the children playing near the barn. He smiled, feeling something deep and peaceful in his heart. That was when he saw a rider approaching from the east. The silhouette looked familiar even before the sunlight hit her face. "Clara Whitmore." He stood up, surprised but smiling. "Didn't think I'd see you again," he called out as she slowed her horse. Clara grinned. "I didn't think I'd come back," she said, dismounting. "But I was nearby for another story, and I wanted to see how this one ended." Ethan laughed softly. "Still writing your stories, huh?" "Always," she said. "But this one feels different. It feels real." He led her to the porch, and they sat together watching the sunset. She looked around, taking in the ranch. The children, the flowers by the well, the sound of peace in the air. "You've changed everything," she said quietly. Ethan shook his head. "No, everything changed me." Clara smiled, looking at him. "You broke the curse, Ethan. You found redemption." He looked out toward the horizon. "Redemption isn't something you find," he said slowly. "It's something you build, one day at a time." They sat in silence for a while. The sky darkened and the first stars began to appear. Clara turned to him and asked softly, "Do you still hear it?" Ethan thought for a moment. "Not with my ears," he said finally. "But sometimes when the wind moves just right, I feel it. Not a whisper anymore, just peace." Clara nodded, understanding. "Then your brother's truly at rest." Ethan smiled. "So am I." That night, the children insisted Clara stay for supper. They laughed, told stories, and shared simple food under the open sky. Clara watched as Ethan helped Tommy fix his plate, listened to the others joke about horses, and laughed freely. She realized she was seeing a man who had rebuilt not just his ranch, but his soul. Later, after the children had gone to bed, Clara walked with Ethan toward the old well. Fireflies danced around them, and the air was cool and soft. The flowers around the well had grown tall and bright. She leaned against the wooden frame and said quietly, "You turned this place into something holy." Ethan smiled, shaking his head. "I just stopped running from it." She looked at him for a long moment. "You're at peace now, aren't you?" He nodded. "More than I ever thought I could be." Then he looked up at the stars and whispered, "Go deeper. Make it quick inside." Clara tilted her head, curious. "You still remember those words?" Ethan smiled faintly. "I do. I understand them now. It wasn't about digging into the earth. It was about digging into myself, to find what I buried and to forgive it." They stood there in silence, the moonlight wrapping around them like a soft blanket. A gentle breeze passed, and for just a second Ethan thought he heard a voice again. Not haunting, not sorrowful, but loving. It said only one word: proud. Ethan closed his eyes and smiled, whispering back, "I know." When Clara rode away the next morning, she left behind a notebook on the porch. On the first page, she had written, "Some stories end with peace, but this one begins again each sunrise, in the heart of a man who forgave himself." Ethan kept that notebook on the shelf near the fireplace. Every time he looked at it, he felt grateful, not for what he lost, but for what he had learned. Years later, people would still come to Redemption Ranch. Some came to heal, others to help. Ethan grew older, but his heart never hardened again. He taught every visitor the same lesson he'd learned the hardest way possible. "You can't change the storm," he'd say, "but you can decide what grows after it." And when he walked the fields at sunset, the light warm on his face, he always whispered the same word, a promise, a prayer and a memory all at once. Go deeper. Live with meaning. The cowboy who once believed he was cursed had finally found his way home. Not to a place, but to peace within himself.